200 years ago, monarchy was falling to the power of people's revolutions. Industry and commerce were becoming the driver of existence, and advances in science were changing the way life itself was understood. Artists all over the world were inspired by these times of dramatic change. In Britain, a group of poets and novelists pioneered an alternative way of living and of looking at the world. Among them were William Wordsworth and William Blake. The enduring power of their writing haunts us to this day and inspires us still with visions of nature. This is the story of man's escape from the shackles of commerce and industry to the freedom of nature. At a time when the world was becoming increasingly mechanized, the romantic sought an intense relationship with the natural world. In so doing, they would revolutionize our perception of life itself. In the 18th century, Britain was being devoured by the voracious demands of urbanization. Towns were turning into cities. This was the age and of manufacture. The pulse of life was becoming less human. The rhythms of nature and the body were being overtaken by an imposed system of synchronized time. Public clocks were dictating the daily lives and activities of people. The cities were engulfing everything, like huge machines of trade, industry, and living. They were forcing order and discipline into the lives of their inhabitants. The home, the school, and the workplace were run according to clock time and in obedience to strict rules of human conduct. In the midst of this great new metropolis lived a small boy who dreamed of a very different world. One day in July 1765, he walked from Soho in London to the fields of Peckham Rye, just beyond the city. Lying on the grass, staring up at the light filtering through the trees, he experienced a vision. He saw the trees filled with angelic beings, their bright wings bespangling every bough like stars.
To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour.
The boy's name was William Blake. Throughout his life, he never forgot his childhood vision. He always believed that it was a glimpse of an eternal world, far from the horrors of the city. The Romantics believed that spontaneous childhood visions were the source of adult inspiration. A child allowed to play and dream would become an imaginative adult. But childhood itself was being destroyed by the industrial age. A new workforce was emerging. Boys of between 4 and 7 were sold into labour by their parents and sent to clean the city's chimneys. Many suffocated, and most became deformed. William Blake was touched by the wretched lives of these children. He began to write simple rhymes that expressed the yearning for their redemption.
As Tom was sleeping, he had such a sight of thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned and Jack, all of them locked up in coffins of black. Then come by an angel who had a bright key. He opened the coffins, set them all free. Then down the green plain, leaping, laughing, they run. And wash in a river and shine in the sun.
Blake's short rhymes about children became a collection of illuminated poems entitled Songs of Innocence. They were inspired by the childhood years he spent with his young brother, Robert.
Sound the flute, now with mute, birth delight, day and night. Night way. Sweet as song, cock does crow, say to you.
Flower in heaven's high bower, with silent delight, sits
Little boy, full of joy, little girl, sweet as moon, cock does crow, so to
every man, every
very
mind,
voice.
that prays in his distress, prays to the human form divine, love, mercy,
Mercy, pity, peace.
In February 1787, Blake's own innocence was shattered when Robert was struck by an illness. In the upstairs room of their house at 28 Poland Street, Blake sat with him for 2 weeks, hardly sleeping, watching his brother's health decline. At the last solemn moment of Robert's life, Blake saw his spirit rise from his body and ascend through the ceiling. Blake recollected that the spirit had been clapping its hands for joy. It was one of many visions of infinity that Blake would have throughout his life. Robert had joined the angels and the spirits of the chimney sweeps in a joyful eternity. But Blake himself would be obliged to find joy in the human world. After Robert's death, Blake moved over the river to the leafy outskirts of London. He lived in Hercules Road in Lambeth, a place where he tried to build himself a new life, free from the corruption of the city. But one morning, he looked from his window and was horrified. It was a sight that intensely angered Blake. He demanded that the boy be set free instantly. It seemed intolerable to him that any child, any man, should be subjected to such miseries. The image was at odds with everything Blake believed about the spiritual purity of childhood. His anger entered his poetry. He began to write a bleak companion to his songs of innocence, songs of experience. In these poems, there would be no redemption for the children.
The weeping child could not be heard. In vain. They'd stripped him to his little shirt and bound him in an iron chain, and burned him in a holy place where many had been burned before. The weeping parents wept in vain. Are such things done on Albion's shore?
Blake feared for the future lives of England's children. His was one of the first voices raised to warn against the destructive potential of the Industrial Revolution.
It turns that which is soul and life into a mill, into a machine.
Blake foresaw a world where people would be engaged in endless toil, their lives disfigured by the laws of the factory and the industrial system. He imagined seeing the world through their eyes.
They told me that I had 5 senses to enclose me up. They enclosed my infinite brain into a narrow circle. Command. One joy. One desire. One curse. One weight. One measure. One end, one God, one law.
Just a short walk from Blake's house in Lambeth by the Thames, where now stands an office building, stood Albion Mill. It was the first factory in London, designed to produce some 6,000 bushels of flour each week. For Blake, the repetitive production lines of these huge new mills cast human identity into uniform molds, endlessly repeatable. Spirituality and imagination were denied or forgotten. Blake referred to Satan as the miller of eternity. In one of his poems, Satan's father congratulates his son on his evil creations.
my youngest born, to mortals, thy mills seem everything.
Blake expressed his fury in words that have become the most familiar lines of English poetry.
And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen?
William Blake's most famous lines are now sung as Jerusalem, an unofficial national anthem. But they were written as a poem of radical protest against the corruption of industry and commerce, a manifesto for the romantic poets, horrified by the darkness descending upon England.
And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? And was Jerusalem builded here among these dark panic mills?
One evening in March 1791, Albion Mill caught fire. Blake would have seen the flames rising above the city, and he might have rejoiced with the millers who celebrated on Blackfriars Bridge. The factory was destroyed and remained a blackened and empty shell until its demolition in 1809. Blake passed it every time he walks into the city, a symbol of hope in an increasingly mechanized world. Anyone who has ever yearned for a simple life, free from the constraints of modern society, owes a debt to William Blake. The work of William Blake was not well known to the other Romantic poets, but one of them reacted to the Industrial Revolution in the same way. He escaped the city in order to preserve the innocence of his child. One day, in the autumn of 1796, a young poet called Samuel Taylor Coleridge was rushing home from Birmingham to Bristol. He had received unexpected news of the premature birth of his son, and he wrote a poem about his feelings of anticipation. His instinctive emotions could be those of any modern father.
Ah me, before the eternal sire I brought the unquiet silence of confused thought and shapeless feelings. My overwhelmed heart trembled, and vacant tears streamed down my face.
This emotional response of a father to the birth of his child might seem unexceptional today, but for the time, these were radical sentiments. he changed. He gave up his job as a traveling preacher and moved away from the city to begin a rustic scheme of life here in the Quantock Hills. In doing so, he was to redefine the notion of parenthood and return the child to nature.
I am anxious that my children should be bred up from the earliest infancy in the simplicity of peasants, their food, drink, and habits completely rustic.
The time Coleridge spent here in Somerset was the happiest in his life. As a child, he was sent away to school in London and detested. He wanted his son to be schooled by nature. One frosty night in 1798, he wrote to his son in celebration of the new romantic vision of childhood.
I was reared in the great city, pent amid cloisters dim. But thou, my babe, shalt wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores, beneath the crags of ancient mountains. So shalt thou see and hear the lovely shapes and sounds intelligible of that eternal language.
For the Romantic poets, childhood was inseparable from nature. They believed that our earliest lives are the source of our humanity. One friend of Coleridge had experienced nature from his earliest years. He grew up in the Lake District and was profoundly influenced by the power of its landscape. On a clear night in the early 1780s, a young boy was returning home from school along the shores of Ullswater. A moment of madness or inspiration prompted him to steal a boat and row out onto the lake. This experience would define the course of his life. The young boy was called William Wordsworth. Years later, the memory of this childhood experience was an inspiration for one of his greatest poems.
And dipped my As I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. When from behind that craggy steep, a huge cliff, as if with voluntary power, upreared its head.
The Lake District was the place where Wordsworth always felt most at home. But it was also the place where his childhood happiness had been shattered. His mother died when he was only 7, and his beloved sister Dorothy had been sent away to live with relatives. And then, when Wordsworth was 13, his father lost his way on the Lakeland Fells and was forced to spend the night there, exposed to the elements. When he came home, he fell ill and died a few days later. as the young Wordsworth sat alone in the boat on Ullswater, he too was at the mercy of nature.
I struck and struck again. Growing still in stature, the huge cliff rose up between me and the stars, and still, with measured motion, like a living thing, strode after me. With trembling hands, I turned, and through the silent water, stole my way back to the cavern of the willow tree.
Wordsworth's terror had a profound impact on his imagination. For him, this strange experience literally brought nature to life.
Huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men moved slowly through my mind by day and were the trouble of my dreams.
In the absence of parents, Wordsworth was being educated by the natural forces all around him. At the age of 20, he travelled to the Alps. This was not a journey to a specific place. This expedition had quite a different goal. Instead, Wordsworth was searching for an emotion. His youthful imagination craved solitude, danger, and overwhelming experience. By the standards of his time, his was a strange and even incomprehensible. Wordsworth travelled across some of the most perilous terrain in the world. One slip might have brought destruction. But he felt alive. One night, he found himself in exactly the same conditions that had killed his father. But for Wordsworth, the experience of being trapped in the mountains in the dark was also one of awe and pleasure.
The cry of unknown birds, the mountains, more by darkness visible than their own size than light. The breathless wilderness of clouds, the clock that told with unintelligible voice the widely parted hours, the noise of streams, and sometimes rustling motions nigh at hand, which did not leave us free from personal fear.
The further he travelled through the Alps, the closer he came to the source of his inspiration. Throughout the journey, he wrote letters to his sister.
Dear Dorothy, my spirits have been kept in a perpetual hurry of delight by the almost uninterrupted succession of beautiful objects which have passed before my eyes.
The immeasurable height of woods decaying, never to be decayed. The stationary blasts of waterfalls, and everywhere along the hollow rent, winds, thwarting winds, bewildered and forlorn. The torrents shooting from the clear blue sky.
Wordsworth was beginning to recognize that the natural world was something more than a retreat from private pain and disappointment. It was the power at the heart of his imagination, the romantic imagination. It could render him small and insignificant, yet it could also connect him with eternity.
I held unconscious intercourse with beauty, all his creation.
When Wordsworth returned to England, he was reunited with his sister Dorothy. Ever separated again. In 1798, they went on a walking tour of the Wye Valley. They visited Tintern Abbey. For Wordsworth, the Abbey was a reminder of a more harmonious pre-industrial past. It was a place of spirits, of exultant experience, and of inspiration. The Abbey, concealed by nature, was a powerful romantic metaphor. Nature was ultimately greater than man. The ruined building, in its beautiful setting, was an image both of serenity and of desolation. The Romantics were half in love with ruins. They were the symbols of ancient time, forgotten and decayed, that cast their shadows over the new mechanical world of the Industrial Revolution. For Wordsworth, this was a moment out of time. It allowed him to look back upon the course of his life and grasp the evolution of his relationship with nature.
The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, the in the deep, gloomy wood, their colours and their forms, to me were then an appetite, a feeling, and a love.
His response was central to the romantic view of the world that endures to this day.
I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity.
Wordsworth experienced something with which many of us can now identify in our modern pilgrimages to nature.
A presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns.
The Romantics were the first to express a yearning for the sublime in nature. We have the same sublime ever since. The way we relish a sunset is a learned experience, one we learned from the Romantics. The feeling that Wordsworth expresses is beyond rational understanding. It is a feeling of the sublime, of all the grandeur and divinity in the natural world. It is a state of being that transcends the mundane and mechanical world in which we live. Romantics, it represented the longing to be free. But the sublime was more than just the beauty of a sunset. It was about awe and terror. The natural world was a dangerous place without convention, society, or God. The sublime is man lost in the immensity of nature. The key to the sublime was the ability to lose yourself, the experience of having no horizons, a sense of confinement. On a summer's day at the turn of the 19th century, a young boy named John Clare set out from the Northamptonshire village of Helpstone to walk to the end of the world. Clare was the son of an agricultural labourer. He was in love with the freedom that the natural world afforded him. So he set off, determined to experience everything the world had to offer.
To the world's end I thought I'd go. And over the brink just peeper down to see the mighty depths below.
He was missing for a day and an evening. His parents were afraid that he had been killed. The whole village began the search for him. But the boy was oblivious, as if entranced by his own dreams of freedom.
I paused to wonder where I got. Thought I got beyond the sun. Seemed to rise another way. The very world's end seemed near. So back, I turned for very fear. With eager haste and wonder struck, pursued as by a dreaded spell, till home.
Claire grew up to be a poet. This village and the countryside around it were his inspiration. He lived here and from the age of 13 worked in the Bluebell Inn next door.
It was a good place. They treated me more like a son than a servant. It was the nursery for my rhymes.
You can imagine what it was like in John Clare's days, though, can't you? You know, when you really...
Clare wrote poems here about the things he knew best, his childhood and the beauty of the open countryside.
The landscape stretching view that opens wide with dribbling brooks and rivers wider floods, and hills and vales and darksome lowering woods, with grains of varied hues and grasses pied. All these with hundreds more far off and near approach my sight, and please to such excess that language fails the pleasure to express.
But the countryside he knew and loved was about to be transformed. In the latter half of the 18th and in the early 19th century, a series of enclosure acts was passed by Parliament in order to maximize the profit derived from the earth. The common land was fenced off for agricultural use. The English countryside was being exploited for the sake of ever-expanding commerce. In 1809, a parliamentary act was passed enclosing all the lands of John Clare's immediate neighborhood. As the fields were enclosed, William Blake's prophetic vision of the Industrial Revolution had reached the natural world itself, creating barriers to freedom that still exist. John Clare could no longer wander to the ends of the earth. He found himself confined in the very place that he had once felt most free. And it sent him spiraling into madness.
Crossbury Way in a hole round Oak's narrow lane, with its hollow trees like pulpits I shall never see again, enclosure like a Bonaparte net not a thing remain. It levelled every bush and tree and levelled every hill, and hung the moles for trains as though the brook is running still. It runs a naked brook, cold and chill.
John Clare spent the last 24 years of his life enclosed within the walls of a lunatic asylum. His doctor noted that his insanity was preceded by years addicted to poetical prosing. He was a true, if neglected, romantic. His poetry describes an England where the freedom of nature had been curtailed by the forces of profit and progress. With the Enclosure Acts, the ability to experience the true power of nature seemed to have been all but eliminated. Then, on the 12th of April 1815, Mount Tambora in Indonesia. This was the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded history. Beauty and wrath combined. With the eruption, 1.5 million tons of dust were ejected into the upper atmosphere. The vegetation on nearby islands perished, and 92,000 people would die as a direct consequence. Tambora's volcanic cloud lowered global temperatures by as much as 3 degrees centigrade. A year after the eruption, the temperature in the northern hemisphere plummeted during the summer months. 1816 was known as the year without a summer. One young poet saw the darkness as the bringer of apocalypse.
I had a dream, which was not. The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space, rayless and pathless, and the icy earth swung blind and blackening in the moonless air. Morn came and went, and came and brought no day, and men forgot their passions in the dread of this, their desolation. The world was void. The populace and the powerful was a lump, seasonless, herbless, treeless, manless, lifeless, a lump of death, a chaos of hard clay. The rivers, lakes, and ocean all stood still, and nothing stirred within their silent depths.
With the explosion of Tambora, it was as if nature had retaliated against all those who had tried to tame, predict, or influence it. The Industrial Revolution and the remorseless advance of science and technology that accompanied it were brought into question. The year without a summer was to change the course of art and of science. The fear of darkness, the fear of nature going awry, aroused a new generation of young romantic poets. Their work presented awful visions of the natural world and would condemn those who believed that they could control nature. This new generation of romantics would meet at the home of Lord Byron, the Villa Diodati, on the Swiss side of Lake Geneva. These poets were rebelling against the earlier generation of romantics who seemed to have become conservative and reactionary. Byron even referred to Wordsworth as Turdsville and called his poetry puerile and namby-pamby.
I must think less wildly. Too long and darkly till my brain became a whirling gulf of fantasy and flame. During that dark summer at the Villa Diodati, the thunderstorms were the only source of natural light. The guests rarely left the house. This would be the setting for the creation of one of the most original novels in the English language.
Among us was a young woman named Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, lover of his friend, the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. This 18-year-old was the daughter of the feminist Mary Wollstonecraft and the philosopher William Godwin. Throughout her life, she had been surrounded by intellectuals and radical ideas.
Many and long were the conversations between Lord Byron and Shelley, to which I was a devout but nearly silent listener. They talked of the principles of life, and whether there was any probability of its ever being discovered. Perhaps a corpse would be reanimated. Perhaps the component parts of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and endured with vital warmth.
When Mary went to bed that night, she could not sleep. As a young girl, she had heard tales of experiments with electricity. It was a force that had always enchanted her. She had a nightmarish vision.
I saw, with shut eyes, but acute mental vision. I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts, kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man, stretched out. And then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life.
The result of Mary's dream was the greatest of all horror stories written in English, Frankenstein. This fable of a young Genovese student obsessed with the principles of occult science and the making of new life is a great hymn to the romantic ideal.
With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. By the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs.
The creature, spurned by the world, roams the vast mer de glace in the Vale of Chamonix, just like his romantic forebearers. There, he confronts
Hateful day when I received life, accursed creator. Why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God in pity made man beautiful and alluring after his own image, but my form, the type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and bored.
Frankenstein is a prophecy that science might be misused by those who wish to alter or tamper with nature. The novel's frightful horror is the dark reflection of the romantic sublime. Its message was simple yet powerful. Respect and revere nature, for it has the power to destroy you. Science alone is not enough. It is a warning many people are repeating to this day. Everyone who seeks peace by a river, upon a mountain, or upon a beach is heir to the Romantics, a beneficiary of their visionary imagination. Anyone who looks upon nature and thinks about man's place within it owes a profound debt to the Romantics. For when they looked at nature, they were also looking into their souls. Man himself contained all the terrors and secrets of the sublime.
Another episode of this program airs next week on TVO.
Find out more about some
Good evening, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, students and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors and professionals, those who are listening, watching. Nathaniel Hawthorne, Dr. Hildgardsen, was born at Salem in Massachusetts, America on 4 July 1804. He was a very famous literary giant in American literature. His fame as a writer moved from generation to generation. He lost his only 12 years old, so his mother took him to his brother for his schooling. He studied at Bowdoin College for 4 years, that is from 1821 to 1825. He devoted much of his time to reading and did not show his intelligence very much. So he came to be known as an idle student. Here he had some very good friends. He made friendship with Franklin Pierce, who later became the president of the USA. When Franklin Pierce became the president of the USA, he appointed Hawthorne the American consul at Liverpool, and Hawthorne worked there as such from 1853 to 1857. Nathaniel Hawthorne started writing stories at a very early age and published them, but he could then gather no fame for himself. He could become famous in the literary world rather late in life, when his great novel The Scarlet Letter was published in 1850. The very surprising thing about Nathaniel Hawthorne was that he devoted his whole life to writing, but he produced comparatively little. He was a contemporary of some great Americans like Thoreau and Emerson, and shared with them some ideals of the times, while in several other aspects he was markedly different from them. The greater part of Nathaniel's boyhood was passed at Salem, and it was only after the death of his father, when he was 14 years old in 1818, that he went to live in the town of Raymond along with his mother. This town was situated on the Lake Sebago. The quiet and beautiful atmosphere of the place affected him favorably. Later, Hawthorne spoke of this place as the one where he got his cursed habit of solitude. The period from 1825 to 1837 was a formative period in Hawthorne's literary career. He spent this period in seclusion from society. He read voluminously and wrote the experimental 7 Tales of Native Land, all of which he presumably destroyed. His first published tale was Francois, wherein he made the world of thoughts and of reality quite separate and irreconcilable. But this time Nathaniel was grappling with the problems of his living, his own life, and at the same time adjusting himself to society. After the publication of Francois, Hawthorne happily hit upon the short tales for the exercise of his creative abilities. Between 1830 and 1852, he wrote over 100 short stories, which were published in 3 collections: Twice Told Tales 1837, Moses of an Old Man Say, and The Show Image. A 4th collection of stories came out posthumously in the name of Sketches and Studies. In 1883, Hawthorne had already left this world in 1864. Nathaniel Hawthorne has written this remarkable essay for understanding how we can regenerate, recreate, and reoperate the declining position and drawbacks, weaknesses, shortcomings of the human nature. So it is very easy to uplift and to rejuvenate from the stage which is impossible to uplift, but it can be possible with the use of some experiments. As Nathaniel Hawthorne was a very famous literary giant in American literature. He was a great school days friend of Franklin Pierce, who later became the President of the USA. The writer tries to bring home to the minds of the readers that human nature is essentially incorrigible. Three old gentlemen and a widow old lady virtually are rejuvenated by swallowing the wondrous water of the fountain of youth. They become young and soon start behaving irresponsibly like wanton young people. In these lines, the writer tells us the effect which the swallowing of the wondrous water of the fountain of youth had brought upon the four old people. The cheeks of the old persons became rosy, and there was no sign of old, wrinkled, and dying face. Formerly they were looking fixedly at one another. They felt the magic power of that wondrous water which had taken away all their old age signs which Father Time had made on their faces. Dr. Heidegger's experiment, the writer tries to bring home to the minds of the readers that human nature is essentially bad. It is beyond correction or reform. Three old gentlemen and the old widow lady became young and vigorous once again after drinking the water of the fountain of youth, but soon they started behaving irresponsibly like wanton people. In these lines, the writer exposes to the readers the effect of that wonderful liquid on the whole body systems of the four old persons. The liquid showed its effect even when the draught of the liquid was passing through their throats. They became young and energetic, their cheeks grew rosy and their eyes became bright and clear, their grey hair turned deep black. The writer tries to bring home to the mind of the readers that human nature is essentially bad. It is beyond correction and reform. Three old gentlemen and a widow old lady drank the water of the fountain of youth and became energetic, but they soon started behaving irresponsibly like wanton people. In these lines, the writer says that the liquid had made all the four persons young and jubilant, but soon the effect of the wonderful liquid was gone and they all grew old again. It had been a truth. The water of youth possessed the virtue of making the people young, but this effect was much more short-lived. It was less lasting than that of wine. Wine also excites our passions and creates enthusiasm and frenziness in our body. The use of the stained liquid had streamed off the sensitiveness in the senses of the people, and it had made them feel young and enthusiastic. But soon it fizzled out, and the four persons felt as old as they were before. It was given me by Sylvia Ward, whose portrait hangs yonder, and I at our wedding. 5 and 50 years it has been treasured between the leaves of this old volume. Now would you dare it possible that this rose of half a century could ever bloom again? It was apparently with an effervescent gas, for little bubbles were continually ascending from the depth of the glasses and bursting in silvery spray at the surface. As the liquor diffused a pleasant perfume, the old people doubted not that it possessed cordial and comfortable properties, and though utterly sceptic as to its rejuvenescent power, they were inclined to swallow it at once. Heidegger's experiment, but they were young, their burning passing proved them so, inflamed to madness by the coquetry of the girl widow, who neither granted nor quite withheld her favors. The three rivals began to interchange threatening glances, still keeping hold of the fair prize. Their They grappled fiercely at one another's throats. Nathaniel Hawthorne's story, Dr. Heidegger's experiment, is based on the study of human nature. It exposes that human nature is full of weaknesses and many of them are incorrigible. Every old person wants to show himself as young. Sex is an instinct which haunts every man. The story exposes this weakness of human nature, and this weakness, the writer finds, is incorrigible. The experiment made by Dr. Heidegger, as given below, testifies this statement. Dr. Heidegger's experiment, invitation to his four friends. Dr. Heidegger was a strange man. He had some eccentricities which he wanted to satisfy. He had wonderful liquid, the effect of which he wanted to be observed. He needed some persons for this purpose to be experimented upon, since the experiment was related to youth of persons. He wanted both male and female old persons to be involved in his experiment. He invited four of his friends, of whom one was lady. Dr. Heidegger conducted this experiment in his study chamber. So he called all the four old persons to his study chamber. Dr. Heidegger sent the water of the fountain of youth. Dr. Heidegger had a wonderful liquid which he thought could revive old persons and withered things to their youth and freshness. This liquid was the water from the fountain of youth. Dr. Heidegger and the rose. Dr. Heidegger had a beloved named Sylvia Ward. He was to marry her, but he could not. She had died on her bridal eve. This lady had presented Dr. Heidegger's a rose. Dr. Heidegger had placed the rose among the leaves of a voluminous book. The rose later was withered and dried up. Dr. Heidegger's experiment on the rose. Dr. Heidegger expected the rose to revive freshness. So he threw the rose into the vase which had the water of the fountain of youth. The rose stirred, and a little time after the leaves of the rose became green and its petals became crimson. The four guests who were the friends of the doctor were surprised, but they called it deception and some trick. The rose had become almost as fresh as Sylvia Ward had given to him a century ago. Dr. Heidegger's experiment to revive youth to old persons. Dr. Heidegger wanted to observe the effect of the water of the fountain of youth upon the old persons. The four guests upon whom the wonderful water was to be experimented thought it to be one of the eccentricities of the doctor. But the doctor insisted that the wonderful water would revive youth. He filled 4 champagne glasses with that wonderful liquid to be drunk by the 4 guests, but he asked them to make few general rules for their guidance before swallowing the drink. They would be virtuous and would act with wisdom, young under the effect of the wondrous water. The 4 guests then drank off the water and put their glasses on the table again. The wondrous water showed its effect, and soon there was cheerful glow on the faces of the 4 guests. Formerly they coughs like, but then there was rosy glow on their cheeks, and the time-created wrinkles on their faces had disappeared. Widow virtually felt herself a young woman. Seeing the effect of the liquid, the guest demanded more of that water. Dr. Heidegger asked them to keep patience as he was observing the effect philosophically. The champagne glasses were again filled with the wonderful water. The guests took those glasses and immediately swallowed the liquid. It had a magical effect. Their whole body system was rejuvenated when the liquid was only passing through their throats. The guests also felt the magic power of that liquid. They felt the gush of young life shooting through their veins. They were in the happy prime of their youth. Their body and soul became vigorous. They felt like newly created beings in a newly created universe. Their vigorous youth then made them ever excited. They laughed loudly at their old-fashioned garments. All the guests were unruly in their behavior. They behaved irresponsible. They pretended to show themselves strange. One of them tried to imitate the high dignity of Dr. Hidgar. They shouted and leaped about the room. The widow Wycherley, with a mischievous merriment, assented to this unruly behavior of his guest. The girl widow Wycherley was almost inflamed to madness. She flirted, but neither she did grant to nor did she withhold her favors from the three guests. It made them to interchange threatening looks. They exasperated fierce thoughts, then they lost their youth and got back their old age. Thus Dr. Hidgar's experiment, though successful, ended woefully. How to describe Dr. Hidgar's study room? Dr. Hidgar's study room was a storehouse of antique goods. A curious place. Dr. Hidgar's room was a curious place which was very much similar to the nature of its owner. It was a dim and old-fashioned chamber. It was festooned with cobwebs. The room and the goods there in world covered with dust of long past. There were several bookcases made of oak wood. They were standing against the walls of the room. There were many other amazing and antique goods in his study room. Bronze bust of Hippocrates. On the central bookcase, there was a bronze bust of Hippocrates, the Greek physician and the father of medicine. Dr. Hidgar used to consult it when he was faced with the difficulties and complications in his practice. The mirror in the gilt frame. In the most hidden and dark corner of the room, there was a dim gilt frame with a mirror in it. There were stories about this mirror. The stories said that there were the spirits of Dr. Hidgar's deceased patients in its edge. Whenever the doctor looked towards this mirror, those spirits also started at him. Full-length portrait of a young lady. On the opposite side of the chamber, there was a full-length portrait of a young lady. The portrait of this lady, fitted in a gilt frame, looked more beautiful. The portrait seemed to beautify the room. The name of this lady was Sylvia Ward, whom Dr. Hidgar was to marry. But she had died on her bridal eve. A ponderous volume in Dr. Hidgar's study room. The most curious thing in Dr. Hidgar's study room was a very heavy folio volume. Nobody knew the title of this book. It was called the Book of Magic. It was bound in black leather and was set with heavy silver clasps. Once the chambermaid lifted it up to brush away the dust from it. As a result, there was rattling of the doors of the almirah. The portrait of the lady had stepped 1 foot out on the floor. Several horrible and disgusting figures had peeped out from the mirror. The bronze bust of Hippocrates also showed its anger on this incident. The study room may be called a room of occult sciences. So dear friends, your presence is praiseworthy, admirable. May God bless all of you for listening the words of English literature that will help you in understanding the emotional meanings of the words by your 100% presence of your mind. Dr. Hidgar was an eccentric who conducted strange experiments to satisfy his eccentricities. Dr. Hidgar is the main figure in the story. The whole story revolves around the personality of Dr. Heidegger and his activities. He is a man who gives an eccentric person. Dr. Heidegger is a very peculiar and unique old gentleman. He thinks unique and does unique. He is an eccentric and has a number of eccentricities. His understanding of human nature. Dr. Heidegger understands human nature well. He knows that commits mistakes, detects them, but he again commits them. Thus, he shows his knowledge of human psychology. He knows that man in his youth commits sins. At that time, he does not understand that his sins will trouble him in later life. When he is young and in this excitement he commits sins. Mr. Madbone loses his old wealth playing speculation in excitement. Colonel Killigrew loses his good health engaging himself in sexual pursuits, and Mr. Gascoigne earns bad name in politics to sow with unselfish ends. Widow Wycherley, the beauty queen of her days, also loses her charm in her sexual and scandalous activities. His love for the old and the antique, Dr. Heidegger's study room in an expression of his love for antique things, the presents, old bookcases, the bust of Hippocrates, his gilt-framed mirror, more than half a century old full portrait of Sylvia Ward, the ponderous volume known as a book of magic, the rose presented to him by Sylvia Ward half a century for the old and the antique. His study room is old-fashioned and has the festoons of cobwebs. We do not find anything in its new form in his study room. His faith in things beyond